Welcome to episode 24 in our series on Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto's The Path of the Just, and we are up to chapter 15, and this chapter deals with how one acquires abstinence and further details on the whole concept of gaining new disciplines for yourself by limiting certain aspects of your intake and your physical intake and mental intake. So the Ramchal begins. The ideal way for a person to acquire abstinence is to examine the inferior nature of the pleasures of this world, their insignificance, of the serious ills that are likely to emerge from them. The enticement of the eyes, which are tempted by the appearance of things that seem good and pleasant, draws one nature to these pleasures to such an extent that one needs great strength and shrewdness in order to remove himself from their influence. It was this enticement that caused the first sin to be committed, as the verse testifies, and it quotes from Bereshit 3 verse 6. The woman saw that the tree was good to eat, and it was desirable to the eyes, and the tree was also attractive as a means to gain intelligence. So she took some of its fruit and ate it. Yet, when a person discerns that this good is totally false, illusory, and without any permanence, and the evil in it is real or imminently about to emerge from it, then surely he will loathe it and reject it totally. This then is the entire lesson that one must teach himself, to recognize the flimsy nature of these pleasures and their falseness until he instinctively comes to loathe them and will find no difficulty in casting them out. So if we want to apply this to perhaps modern vices, you could talk about eating too much, where perhaps we gorge ourselves on sweet things, and what happens, we have a momentary pleasure, sugar rush, but then we have to deal with our weight gain, and we have to spend far longer trying to lose the weight we put on from these momentary flashes of kind of food lust, so to speak. And also you could talk about alcohol. Although alcohol can be used for a holy purpose, like making kiddush, it can also be used to get yourself completely drunk. And we know that we can cause ourselves tremendous damage to our minds by over-drinking. And we can also ruin our livers by taking things too far. So everything in moderation. Also drugs as well. Drugs is a perfect example of a short-term high, but then you're going to ruin your life in every aspect if you continue these destructive habits. And the Ramchal continues. Although the pleasure of eating, for example, is the most sensory and stimulating of all pleasures, is there anything more perishable and more quickly lost than food? The span of time of its entry into the body is no more than the time it takes to pass through the esophagus. Once it leaves that area and enters the intestines, it is gone and forgotten, as though it had never existed. Eating coarse bread, if one were to eat enough, could satiate him, the same way eating fattened geese does. The truth of this lesson becomes even more apparent when one considers that the many disorders that one might contract through eating, or at least the heaviness that one feels after meals, and the vapours that becloud his brain. Surely then, with all this in mind, a person will not want such a thing, since its good is not beneficial and its bad is harmful. Similarly, if one were to examine all the other worldly pleasures, one would realize that even the apparent good in them lasts only a short time, while the harm that they cause is so serious and prolonged that it does not befit any intelligent person to risk the danger of these ills for the sake of the minimal good that will accrue from them. This is obvious. When one accustoms himself to this truth, and analyze it with diligence, he will slowly be freed from the stultifying imprisonments which the corporeal world has imposed on him, and he will no longer be enticed by pseudo-enjoyments. He will then loathe them, and he will become aware that he should take from this world only what is essential, as I have written. However, just as contemplation leads to the acquisition of abstinence, we find that thoughtlessness leads to its loss, and so does keeping company regularly with magnates and people of high society who pursue honor and multiply vanity. When one sees the display of splendor and grandeur, his passions will inevitably become aroused in his desire for them. And even if he succeeds in not allowing his inclination to vanquish him, nonetheless he will not escape without a struggle, and consequently he is in danger. This is what King Solomon said in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 2. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of festivities. And I guess we've also been warned in Pirkei Avos not to kind of social climb or chase honors for this very reason, because you find yourself in social settings that lead you to perhaps getting drunk and other things which are obviously detrimental to one's spiritual growth. Why backtrack? Why, if you've made gains in your spiritual life, why put yourself in a setting that would lead to potential downfall, slipping down this ladder that you've tried so hard to climb and ascend? Now the Ramchal talks about the idea of solitude and its means for combating the factors that undermine abstinence. So the Ramchal continues, more valuable than anything is solitude. Just as it removes worldly affairs from one's sight, it also removes the desire for them from his heart. King David was extolling solitude when he stated in Psalms 55 verse 7, "If only I had wings to fly like a dove, I would then fly afar and find a place to dwell. I would wander afar and sleep in the wilderness." We find in Scripture that the prophets Eliyahu and Elisha established themselves in the mountains so that it would have solitude, and those sages of blessed memory, Hasidim and Harishonim, who assiduously practiced piety in the earlier generations, followed in their footsteps, because they found that this was the most effective means for the acquisition of abstinence, which would protect them from being caught up in the folly of their contemporaries. So the Ramchal is telling us to perhaps separate ourselves in some way from this society, perhaps if you feel that it would be beneficial to you, and if you feel that you have the right temperament to actually be in solitude without it affecting your mind, detrimentally. So the Ramchal continues and concludes, the acquisition of abstinence demands caution. One should not think that he can jump ahead or leap to the ultimate goal in a moment's time. He will surely not succeed. Rather, one should cultivate abstinence progressively, bit by bit. Today he acquires this bit, tomorrow he will add a bit more, until he adapts to it completely, for it will become part of him just like his natural instincts. So that concludes the 15th chapter, and that's very, very true. Again, we talk about climbing this ladder, all of these different aspects of character, abstinence and piety and cleanliness, they're all rungs on a ladder. And it's silly to try and run up 3 rungs at a time. God has patience with the pious and the people who are earnestly and genuinely trying to improve themselves. And if they have to do it slowly, so be it. God is happy to wait, because it's not easy to get over certain habits that are formed over the majority of our lifetimes. So fascinating chapter, that very, very interesting. And talking of rungs, we are about to reach the next rung, which is in chapter 16, next episode, which is the virtue of purity. So I look forward to that.